Right. So thank you very much. As I said, tonight is the anniversary of Kristallnacht, and I think it's really interesting that we're having this discussion now. I think it's also really interesting that we're having this discussion with, as you've said, Nick, people of quite different perspectives around cooperation and tackling inequality and challenging racism. I did ask you specifically to talk around some of the historical aspects about cooperation and its role in challenging racism and specifically slavery. And this is the slavery being the greatest long-term human rights abuse of a people of lasting centuries, and that can never be, you know, kind of undersold, understated as an issue. And I think, you know, we as cooperators are visionaries for a better world, and always have been, but we've often found ourselves in very challenging situations where it has been hard to do things. I've recently taken a role in the Alton Rise Co-op, and earlier this afternoon I was doing my core induction training of the co-op group's bullying and harassment policy. And I think one of the things that it really drew out for me was not only the issues around the need for victims of discrimination, racism to speak out, but also that actually people who are not victims also have an incredible role to play in terms of being witnesses, taking acts of solidarity. And it's only with that you can genuinely get deep-seated wholesale political change that changes our lives for a better tomorrow. So with that kind of broad introduction, Nick, can I ask you to start on your kind of contribution to this evening? And again, I'm very, very grateful that you've given up your time for this, and I'm sure that there's a lot that we can learn. Thank you.
And Joanna, for goodness sake, if I go on for too long, you know, feel free to you know, chuck something proverbial at me, because I know too much about this. You know, it's dangerous territory for me to get into. So I spent a lot of time on this, studying this area, and I enjoy talking about it because I think it's an incredible story. What started me off recently, exploring this area, was in 2017. The co-op group was awarded the Thomson Reuters Stop Slavery Award. This was an award made for their programme called Bright Futures. Bright Futures is a programme which takes freed modern slaves. It's horrible to think that there's such a thing exists, but it does. Freed modern slaves and gives them work opportunities. Actually, instead of you know, just letting them fester or deporting them, which often happens, the group set up a program to give them training opportunities and then to give them paid work opportunities, you know, within the group. I'm pleased to say that since this award was made 3 years ago, that the Bright Futures program itself has become a cooperative and has now got members of other businesses as well as the cooperative group. And we've been able to spread it over other commercial enterprises who also now take former people who've been enslaved into their work streams, which is just, you know, it's a fantastic achievement. Why I was obsessed with this is earlier, a few years earlier, I'd been walking past the main Manchester one of the main Manchester buildings of the old Cooperative Wholesale Society, and there's a symbol up there on the building which says labour and weight. And I'd always wondered why it was spelt L, in the American spelling of Labour, Labor. And then in a footnote of a book, I discovered a sort of offhand comment. This was a book fairly recently about the history of the CWS, that this was taken from a poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And it was a symbol of anti-slavery. And I thought, well, can that be true? Is that, what's the context for this happening? Why is this? Why did the people at that time in 1863, when they were forming the CWS, decide to make their first trademark? I discovered, registered trademark was the wheat sheaf with labour and weight on it, spelt in the American way. I thought, why would this commercial enterprise in this time trademark a symbol which they believed to be anti-slavery? What was the story behind this? So my researches took me a long way. I discovered the poem is called The Psalm of Life. It is by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. The last paragraph of it goes, "Let us then be up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labour and to wait." And it was that punchline that the early co-operators had taken as part of their trademark. Now, I suppose what you have to know is what was going on in Manchester in 1863 that produced a desire to use this symbolism as part of their brand identity, as we would probably call it today. And that, of course, it was in the middle of the American Civil War. And Lancashire, hundreds of thousands of cotton workers in Lancashire were laid off, many of them in dire straits, because the Civil War had cut off the flow of cotton from the southern states of the United States to Manchester. Manchester in them days, of course, was known as Cottonopolis. It was the great cotton spinning city of the empire. And it relied on cotton from the slave states to produce its products. And what I'm going to cut some of this short because it's I've got a huge amount of detail. But Manchester had also been a huge centre of Chartism, and Engels, in his fantastic book about working class in England, describes Manchester as probably being the most radical city in England. And many of the early Chartists had become co-operators, disillusioned with parliamentary democracy, and decided rather than wait for a Labour government, which of course hadn't even been formed or even thought of, they decided to get on with it themselves and create cooperatives, which I think is a very noble endeavour and a lesson we can probably learn today. But a couple of the guys who were involved in the formation of the CWS were also involved in what was called the Union and Emancipation Society. This was the campaign by workers and cooperators in Manchester to support the union. There was a huge amount of propaganda in support of the southern states in Manchester. Most of the rich people in Manchester relied on Southern American cotton for their living. Even The Guardian, which is 20 years old at this time, having been still in its early days, but was a paper, was supporting the South. Their argument was not about slavery, because they said there were slaves in the North. They're saying the argument is about their right to succession. Of course, when Lincoln made the proclamation against slavery, that changed the dynamic of British support for the war and the Union. And so in Manchester was formed an organisation called the Union and Emancipation Society. The two guys who launched the society managed to raise 30 quid to book the Free Trade Hall for the night of New Year's Eve in 1862. These two guys both ended up, one as the first secretary of the CWS, the other one of the early directors. They got the 30 quid together to book the hall. This is New Year's Eve in Manchester. A very sparse amount of publicity because most of the major press at the time weren't interested in supporting it. One of the local Manchester papers covered it. They printed handbills and they the usual campaign stuff. 6,000 people turned up at the Free Trade Hall on New Year's Eve to support the union. Many of these people had not been at work, were very hungry, seriously tired. This was an astonishing matter of principle on their behalf. It's hard to imagine what an incredible act of solidarity this was. And they made this proclamation in support of the United States, the Union, in support of Lincoln. The Guardian never liked Lincoln. It's worth going through their archives and reading what they say about Lincoln. They think he was a bit of a charlatan. But amazingly, 3 weeks after that meeting in Manchester, Lincoln wrote back to the people of Manchester, thanking them for their support for the Union. And then a few weeks later, a ship, the Admiral Griswold, a North American, Union ship, sailed into Manchester with barrels of flour and food in solidarity with the people of the Northwest. The Co-op played a historical role in all this. The Co-op movement was badly treated by the Famine Relief Committee, which was chaired by Lord Derby, hardly surprising when you know who he is. And they were giving out relief vouchers, which couldn't be used in Co-op stores because they said the Co-op was too expensive. And unless they get rid of their shares, they couldn't have any famine relief. So it was almost a direct attack on the Co-op. But nonetheless, the Rochdale Society alone donated £1,500 towards the Famine Relief Fund. That's in 1863, 64. That's a lot. That's a serious amount of money. They established soup kitchens. They organised education workshops and activities, explaining to people why they were, supporting the union, etc. In his history of the Rochdale Pioneers, George Jacob Holyoake says that before I come to that, in Lincoln's letter to the movement, he says he talks about the Christian heroism. It's an energetic and re-inspiring assurance of the inherent truth and the ultimate universal triumph of justice, humanity, and freedom. George Jacob Holyoake wrote that the cooperative societies had no small share in enabling the people of the two great cotton spinning counties, Lancashire and Yorkshire, to resist the recognition of slave dominion. Now, I think that's an incredible story. I mean, there's lots more detail and lots more interesting elements to it. But the fact that the Cooperative Wholesale Society was born out of a struggle against slavery, I think is a very telling story. I just throw in two other little anecdotes, very short ones, because I think that one is a sort of foundational story of the movement, and it's one that needs to be wider known and better known. In the Spanish Civil War, the London Cooperative Societies joined the Aid for Spain campaign, and they had customers could buy 6p tokens to send milk to Spain. This was in the 1936-38 Spanish Civil War. The CWS joined in the campaign and sent shiploads of what was then milk powder to Bilbao to support starving children and people in the Republican struggle against Franco's fascism. So the cooperative movement was stepping up to support the Republic when the national government and even the National Labour Party were, let's say, a little bit lukewarm in their support, although they should have known better, in my opinion. And just one last one. A couple of years later, when the Kinder transport turned up at Harwich and were put in a holiday camp at Dovercourt, which is just outside Harwich, which wasn't being used at the time. The food and all of the supplies for that camp to support the Kinder transport were paid for and donated by the Old Ipswich Co-operative Society. So these are just snapshots from the history, but I think it's important to remember sometimes that we forget these things. And I absolutely agree with Anjona's point about the history of slavery. There's no corner, no square inch, no tiny cul-de-sac of the entire United Kingdom which did not benefit from slavery. So the idea that it was somehow something that happened somewhere else, we don't really need to worry about it, and that good old England, William Wilberforce abolished it, is fantastical nonsense. I think one of the important people on the platform in that meeting of 1862 was a freed slave. Many of the early movers of the anti-slavery movement in Britain were black. They were slaves, ex-slaves, people who had escaped slavery. And many of the early campaigners against slavery in this country were not white liberals. Thomas Clarkson came along later, the great Quaker who was the secretary of the anti-slavery movement. And then they persuaded Wilberforce to be their frontman. But the movement began with black people freeing themselves. The great agency in this wasn't some white liberalism. It was black people rising up and saying, we've had enough of this, and we've lost that. History has been airbrushed out. The great slave rebellions in Jamaica, in Trinidad, Toussaint Louverture in Haiti. We quietly forget about those. But that's the truth of the matter. We gave up on transatlantic slavery because we couldn't make it work anymore. It was no longer profitable. It wasn't because we had some benign attack of liberalism. So that's my 5 minutes point. I'll shut up because I'll go on all night otherwise. And you won't want to share that with anybody because I think, not him again, just keep going on far too
long. So thank you so much for that, Nick. I'm giving you a round of applause, and so are others. And I guess there are some essential questions about what you've just said. So part of this whole essential question is, why isn't this generally known? Why isn't this story generally told? I mean, cooperators have always been doers rather than, kind of self-promotion or publicists. But you can actually, in terms of what the cooperative group has done over the last year or so over the pandemic, see some of those actions being echoed, getting involved in, promoting, one of the first to promote Marcus Rashford's free school meals campaigns, one of the first, for the cooperative schools, they were the first to get some kind of voucher system over the pandemic. You can see some of the kind of overtures to that. And, and in the start of what you had to say, the issues around modern slavery, the response of the co-op group being an absolutely fundamental, practical kind of, a practical action to try and, kind of do something practically to help victims. And it is this thing about, so why doesn't everybody know about it? Or is this partly to do with the radicalism about cooperation? And because people do see a lot of the issues around cooperation as being maybe a bit mellow, but actually there's a huge amount of practical revolution going on there. And I just wondered what you thought in terms of that.
as a direct comeback, let me just give you a bit of more recent history. I think the big problem with the cooperative movement in Britain, and Kate and others who are familiar with it probably may share this perspective, is there's sort of a demographic hole in it. I'm an old fart now, so I know all this stuff, right? But there's a generation slightly younger than me who when they were growing up, it looked like the cooperative was a bit like the Seal Knot. It was a sort of historical reenactment society. It was quietly going down the toilet. It was just going quietly bankrupt. The only thing that was vaguely radical about it at that time was the bank. The bank was the ethical part of the movement, or appeared to be. And of course, we all know what happened to the bank. It got shafted by a combination of terrible government decision making and poor regulation and hubris. And I think that at that point, it looked like the whole co-op idea was just, it was itself destined for the dustbin of history. What I find incredibly, how shall I put it, exciting is the fact that that's not true in other countries. I was chair of Cooperatives UK for 6 years. And I had the real honour to go and visit many overseas cooperative movements. And my goodness me, there's some incredible movements, they're amazing. And there's so many vibrant young cooperators out there doing amazing stuff. And I think what we've got to be honest about is we had a near-death experience. And I think part of that means we had a period when we were just hanging on for life. We just wanted to stay around, hang on in there, which doesn't make external communication your main product. But I think when you do start to stabilise and start to get back get your meteor back, you realise that life is short and precarious, and therefore there's no point trying to. I think the group now is relatively big, but also relatively small, big enough to do stuff like the Bright Futures Project, but small enough to be quirky, to not be the same as everybody else, to say things that they can, to have a chief executive that's openly anti-racist. It's a great step forward. And I think that boldness comes from where we are today. But I agree, absolutely, there's a gap. I think young people of the values that we espouse now, they get it straight away. My grandparents got it straight away. They can still remember the divvy number, but my kids don't get it. But my grandkids do. So there's this sort of hole in the movement, and I think repairing the damage of that hole is our key task. And part of that is that education and propaganda and marketing, and using our brand to explain these things, that there is a different way of doing business. And I think we do live at a time where there's a lot of people under a lot of economic stress. And people have got this sort of in their head, there's a trade-off between ethics and price. Personally, I don't think there is. But I think people have been persuaded that there is. I'm a regular buyer of everything I can find that's fair trade. I hope you are. So I don't think that's true. I don't think you have to sacrifice your ethics and your principles to be commercially successful. And I think that message is one we need to get back out there. You can do good every day by just going buying your lunch at the co-op. It sounds daft, but it's true.
I'm keen to have other people speak, but I'll just pitch in one more kind of thought, really. I mean, again, I had a meeting of this kind, which was very well attended last year. And one of the representative from the group that I had got along was Denise Scott MacDonald, who now is the group's president. And, for the first time, a Black woman president of such a major organization has to be celebrated. But it isn't just about the performative actions. It has to be about what changes. And again, in the meeting that we had last year, there was a lot of real ambition that what local communities needed to see was actually that real connection of those, how doing business in this way could not only transform communities in this country, but also in the Caribbean, in Africa, in South India, across the world. You know, it is an internationalist movement, and because of the kind of goods that we stock at the co-op, there are incredible opportunities to use, you know, kind of this economic power to completely transform communities. However, that isn't part of the narrative, and maybe because we're not doing well enough that part of the narrative. I don't know what you think, Nick.
I'll tell you something I think, and it's going to be both popular and unpopular. The popular bit is, I don't think charity is a good thing. I think it's a very bad thing. I personally am against charity. Does that mean I don't give to charity? Of course I do. Give to charity all the time. But is it a good thing, charity? No, I think it's a bad thing. Solidarity is a good thing. So I think the real benefit of cooperation is not generating a surplus and giving it away to good causes, admirable as that is. The real benefit of cooperation is, you're absolutely right, Angela, it's inside the business. How do you ensure that the business, all its purchasing and selling, is done in the right way, ethically? Now, this, because we're a relative, because we're a, you know, we're a very big small player, very big in the sense. I mean, for example, recently we've had real challenges with distribution. This is partly because we've got more stores in Scotland than Sainsbury's have got in the entire country. You know, we have got 2,800 group stores and 3,400 if you add in all of the independent society stores. That's more than Tesco's and Sainsbury's added together. So our distribution issues are quite challenging in terms of maintaining a reasonable price ratio for the convenience of having a local store. And the problem you get into is when you want to supply to 3,500 stores a set of products, a company's got to be able to produce 3,500 stores worth of stuff to make it a viable business proposition. Now, if we were bigger, we would have more bargaining power to dictate more to suppliers about what the products are and what our customers want. We're able to do that in a portion of our, if you like, our product range. But probably a bigger portion of it is just the regular stuff that you can buy anywhere, which we have far less influence over. So what I'm trying to say is that this is a mixture of economic pragmatism and trying to be so within the space that we've got to operate in, you know, where we've turned all our tea fair trade, all of our chocolate fair trade, where we've got control over those products. There's nobody in the market, you know, in a better, you know, place ethically than we are. But clearly, a large range of the products, you know, Nescafe in our store for sure is the same as, you know, or calling black label in our store is the same as calling black label in Tesco's. And I think we also have to accept a little bit that many of our customers, they do go, you know, it's the local offie as well as being the local co-op, and they go for these bog standard products. So I think that what we've achieved with in a relatively small band of capacity to achieve it is quite remarkable. But I agree with you, Angela. I don't think we always, because we're doing an advert for the £3.50 meal deal. what's particularly ethical about that? Nothing. You know, it's no different to anybody else's, except it might be 10 pence cheaper, or it might be a little bit better. What we can say, of course, is that all of the eggs are free range, and all of the meat is British, etc., all the things you'd expect from the co-op. But I agree with you. I think that what we need to migrate more towards is, if you like, I know this is going to, this might sound a bit heretical, but slightly less philanthropy and slightly more investment in giving suppliers that probably wouldn't have access to the market, access to it through our distribution system. At the moment, we're stretched beyond capacity because we've had all sorts of problems with Brexit and COVID, building new warehouses, investing in new systems. But I am very hopeful that once we get these, we get over this hump, if Boris lets us, that we'll get in a space where we'll be able to have some more flexibility in those buying and selling arrangements. And I'll throw this one at Kevin. I'd like to see something like Zaytoon or Equal Exchange, Palestinian olive oil for sale in co-op shops. It took me ages to get them to stock bloody Cuban rum. You see the little flag behind me. No, I'm not making a value judgment on whether on Palestine or on Cuba. That's for our customers and our members to decide whether their purchases. And I think that our policy position, for example, on not buying stuff from the illegal occupied territories in Palestine is the right policy to have. I mean, it is illegal, for goodness sake. I mean, what more do you need to know? But I think that we need, if we weren't a membership organisation and our members didn't support us, it would be very easy to give in on some of these issues to noisy, small groups that would want us to change those policies. So it's thanks to our membership base that we can be as radical as we can be. If our growth continues and we sort out some of these behind the scenes architectural issues, I hope that we'll be able to strengthen that and have a broader policy of using our buying and selling power to support ethical products and producers more than we currently do. I mean, I think what we do now is fantastic. I love what we do in Argentina with Rojava Co-op. I love what we're doing with tea. I love what we're doing with in South Africa with wine producers. A lot of those things are fantastic. If we were bigger, we could do even more. So all I'm saying is shop at the co-op more, because nobody else is even thinking about doing this. That's my strap line, I suppose. I'll shut up.
Are there any more questions? So Kevin, you want to kind of come back in? Think that would be great.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Nick. That's a very pertinent point you make. In PSC, we spend a lot of time on the political education, trying to let people know what's going on and letting them know they really can oppose it. We do an awful lot of things against certain businesses like Puma, who sponsor the sporting teams of Israel when Israeli occupation forces are shooting the limbs of Palestinian rival footballers, and they purposely target them. Against Hewlett-Packard, who facilitates all the information exchange to keep the occupation going. We do an awful lot against firms. As individual members, we also are aware of suppliers of things like Palestinian olive oil, and we will buy that and we'll purposely target it. But you're absolutely right. Why don't we go for a partnership with a co-op, and by getting those ethical products into the co-op? And yes, they will cost a bit more, but they're high quality products and there's a market there for them. So thank you very much. I happen to have access to some very senior people in the movement in
Can I just make
UK.
one suggestion, Kev?
Yes, please do.
Quite a large number of co-op stores now have got, if we struck the worker cooperative Sumo up in Yorkshire.
Mm-hmm.
The co-ops, how should we put it? Our own organic stroke vegetarian range was, let's be honest and say it was limited. And it is hard for a convenience retailer to follow the entire spectrum of people's taste. So we formed a relationship with Suma to supply. Most stores have got a Suma racking, which has got, you know, all their Suma products in them. But Suma have never gone for, I mean, I think there are challenges with the volumes and the shelf life of Palestinian olive oil. That's what I've been told in the past. But it might be worth having a conversation. It might be worth doing this, like, how shall I put it? You know, children, sometimes you have to smuggle carrots and cabbage into their diet to keep them healthy. It might be we smuggle this into the stores through a third party, rather than asking the co-op to formulate, because they got to buy, you know, 15, 20,000 items for 3,400 stores. This is a minority of a minority product. And if you're asking the chief buyer in Manchester to look at this, it'll be on his list, but goodness knows what day, in what year he gets to that point on the list. You know what I'm saying? It might be worth a tangential approach via somebody like Suma to get Suma to stock a Palestinian olive oil, and then through Suma to get it into the wider marketplace through people like the co-op, because they've got Suma's now's distribution is pretty good. You know, they've opened a new depot up in the southeast because they're doing so well. Their distribution has gone from, you know, through leaps and bounds. It might be worth a tangential approach through them. That's just something that's just come through off the top of my head.
No, that sounds excellent. And once again, Nick, thank you very much for the proposal on that. I'll ask Angela to share my details to you, because I think knowing your contacts on this and getting my contacts on this could be a real initiative. I will also say there's one other supply chain issue, and supply chains are kind of like my thing as well. So I fully appreciate what you say regarding getting in at an early stage in the supply chain, but it's got to be the whole thing to an extent. So we need partners. But there's another issue with Palestinian olive oil, that it only goes out at the with the will of Israel, which controls all the borders. So we could expect interruption of the supply chain. We can expect potentially products to be held up on borders for a long time, and with short shelf lives, that this can be problematic. But you're perfectly right. All these things can be addressed, not necessarily totally solved, but they can be addressed. And it is a full supply chain thing, which excites me because it's something I know about. Thank you very much. So Angela, if you'll share my details and...
Sure, I will do that. I will do that. I didn't know, Kate or Anne, whether you had anything more to contribute. Kate, whether you wanted to talk about the issues around diversity in the cooperative movement.
I'm happy to wait until everybody else has spoken, actually. But this has been fascinating. Not at all what I was expecting. Well, I didn't really know what to expect, but very interesting. But I'll just wait until everybody else has spoken. Thank you.
So I think, Anne, that's put you on the spot.
It's been a really, really interesting discussion. I've learned so much about co-op, and the fact that there's a lot of information that the general public don't know, and a lot of things, a lot of policies, a lot of things that go on within the co-op that we hardly know. It's not really advertised. It's not one of the stores that shouts or anything. And considering how ethical it is, it should shout more and be known better. I certainly am going to change my shopping habits, really, rather than use it as a food bank sharer. I promote it to my friends as well and let them find out the work that the co-op is doing and the policies they have and the ethics that they have. They're really beneficial. And yeah, it's well done. It's been really interesting. I'm really glad I came this evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And just to say, you know, kind of on the core products, you know, the core household products, the co-op really is there both on quality and price. Just in terms of things like the tea, the coffee, the flour, that kind of thing. It's really, really good. I I also have a bit of a dislike of the £3.50 meal deal. But partly because, you know, then a little bottle of Coke, the price of it individually is something like £1.70, which sounds a bit kind of punitive, but maybe we don't like Coke either. So, so Kate, do you want to just kind of?
Yes. Thank you so much for well, inviting me. I only found out about this meeting a few days ago, and I thought, oh, that title looks interesting. I didn't know there was it was part of a series, and it's been absolutely fascinating. I was really interested to hear what Nick had to say about the history of the CWS. I knew something about that, but only in a kind of vague way. So it was really interesting to hear those details, and I will look out for that poem. A few things I'd like to say. I absolutely agree with what Nick was saying about there being a gap, but I actually put it down to the way that our society has changed since Margaret Thatcher, because we now have not just Thatcher's children, but Thatcher's grandchildren, and everybody taking it for granted that it's human nature to look out for yourself. And it's a strange thing to do, to cooperate. Whereas I think my parents' generation would have understood about cooperating. I think it's a bit of a mysterious, has been a bit of a mysterious concept. And if we look at the TV programs like Dragon's Den, The Apprentice, those kinds of programs, it's almost as if people assume that a capitalist business model is the only way to organize business. And that there isn't any other way. It's like breathing air. You can't imagine any other way of organising. So it's not surprising that the cooperative model doesn't get as much airtime as it should do. And I'm a great believer in increasing education, especially in schools and in business colleges in particular, introducing the cooperative model. It seems to be an ongoing battle that I know the Co-op College has been carrying on for years, and I don't really know how successful that's been. It's almost like sweeping the beach, isn't it? Almost just like arguing against the tide. However, I think recently there has been, probably since Occupy a few years ago, I think there's been a great resurgence of these ideas of working collectively and common ownership and those kinds of concepts amongst young people. And the biggest thing that's going on at the moment that I can see is the growth of something called platform cooperatives, which is young people who are working, maybe delivering pizza or driving Uber cars, where they've got no union, they're not employed, they're on 0-hour contracts and they've got no one looking after them. And there's a great interest in using platform cooperatives to actually help these young people to get together and control their lives and have some economic independence. And a platform means it's a platform on the internet. So there's no physical basis for the business, but they join a website. So I think to me, that's terrific grounds for hope. One last thing I'd like to say is about the olive oil. Suma already stock it, as do Essential. I buy it from Essential here in Bristol. And I think if you wanted to find out about any difficulties in deliveries due to the Israelis controlling the borders, then it would be really good to make contact with the buyers at Suma or the buyers at Essential Trading here in Bristol. And I'm sure they'd be very happy to share any information that they have about the supply of, I can't remember what it's called now, but the supply of Palestinian olive oil.
Yeah. Thanks, Kate. That's great.
So that's me. I'll shut up now.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving me some
just
time.
Just to reinforce everything you said, Kate, I think two things. I think one of the reasons why, if you like, cooperation's making a bit of I wouldn't go over the top, but I think it's definitely a resurgence of thinking about co-ops, particularly amongst young people. I think it's partly because the economic conditions are there where you've got very well-educated young people, no jobs, and loads of underused assets just lying about that nobody's using. This is the perfect, perfect space for cooperatives to grow and develop. I also agree with you absolutely about business schools. I was in a business school until a year ago when I retired, and I introduced a stream of cooperative education into the business school. But bloody hell, it was hard work. I mean, it was like, did you think I was trying to teach the kids Latin, you know? It wasn't the kids that were a problem. It wasn't the students. It was the bloody bureaucracy, you know. What do they need to know this for? What's this about? It was a nightmare, really, really hard work. So I think you're right and the way I explain it to people is, if you think of a conventional business to survive needs workers, it needs customers, it needs inputs from producers, it needs a community to base itself in, and it needs cash. Why should only one of these people be allowed to own it? You know, you can't have a business without the other four ingredients, without suppliers, without producers, you know, without workers, without customers. Why are they not allowed to own the business? So basically, any business that's not just owned by its shareholders can be a co-op. And I think you're absolutely right. You know, Lenin said, I mean, it's probably not the right audience to talk about Lenin, but never mind. Lenin said the future was was communism plus electricity. You know, when he was trying to build the Soviet Union after the revolution. But for me, the future is cooperation plus the internet, because I think you're absolutely right. That free, that ability to build a community virtually. It's just, I mean, I think Uber is a bit like a sort of 17th century hiring fair, isn't he? You know, the poor bloke turns up at the hiring fair, you know, with his tools, and he waits till somebody hires him. He even has to bring his own tools. It's you know, it's not 19th century human relations or 18th century you know, personnel management. It's 17th century. You know, it's not turning the clock back a bit. It's turning the clock back almost forever. And yet, if those Uber drivers owned the Uber app collectively, there wouldn't be anything wrong with it. It would be a fantastic thing and a great tool. And there are taxi co-ops like that.
Preston.
You know, they're all over the country. So what we need is that ability that you know, break it fast, scale quickly, and all that kind of language that the internet lot use. We've got to get some of that element, which these young people, you know, I'm too old to do this now, unfortunately. You know, I struggle to get through the software needed for this kind of stuff. But I think I am excited to see them taking this new technology into places the inventors never thought it would go and never thought was possible. So I do have some confidence, like you, into that space. And thanks very much for that. Just one last point on worker co-ops. I think my personal experience was when we had the Met counties before the Tories abolished them all, both the Greater London Council, the West Midlands County, the South Yorkshire, Merseyside, Manchester, nearly all of them supported a co-op development agency.
Yes.
And for some reason, which I can't quite get my head around, either the money's not there or the will's not there. We managed to persuade Andy Burner, won't we, to take up a cooperative agenda. But they're still a bit, how shall I put it? I've got to be careful because I don't want to upset anybody who's on our side. But I think they're a bit, they get lost in the community thing. Let's have a community-owned thing. You know,
Yeah.
and that's very nice and it sounds fluffy. But actually, if you haven't got it's like in the lockdown, the first lockdown, there was a spontaneous, incredible wave of cooperation across the whole country. People doing shopping for the neighbours they never spoke to. People looking after their kids, people looking after their pets. It was fantastic. It was a joy to experience. But unless you've got a legal, formal business framework, it's not sustainable.
Exactly.
You know, as soon as the charismatic individuals who start it have gone, it would be gone. You know, my cooperative was founded in 1832, just after 6:30, by a group of ribbon weavers in the Foleshill area of Coventry. We've had some shit directors, of which I'm probably the worst. We've had some terrible managers over those 180 years, but the structure has survived. That's how resilient a well-formed cooperative is. And that's why I get a bit annoyed with people who think, oh, well, yeah, we might have this fuzzy community thing, and we like all this, social enterprise. I say that's all very well, but if you want it to be sustainable, you've got to have a legal framework to support those businesses, and it's called a cooperative. Somebody has to own it. It has to be the customers or the workers, or the supply or whatever it is. But it's got to have that solid basis. And I hope that we can get back to programs in Bristol, in the big cities of actual proper support for co-op development, because I think that would be that's the sort of missing piece in that jigsaw of lots of young people, bright, intelligent. I'll say one other thing, but I'm going on too long again. But I'll just say one quick thing. People think the Rochdale pioneers were somehow poor people.
No.
They were downtrodden. They were incredibly well educated. They were high quality artisans who had money.
They were.
In 1844, £1 to be a member was a small fortune. It was a huge investment they put into that business, and I think that we have to recognise that that's the people we need to get on board. It's not something you do for people; it's something you enable people to do for themselves. And I think that if we get back to those key ideas, I think we've got a really good chance in this next period of making of filling that demographic hole I talked about.
So Anne, Kevin and myself live in a kind of cooperative development agency desert zone, having had from our area an absolutely outstanding history in relation to cooperation and independent cooperatives, in particular, kind of Michael Jones Ajola, Workers Cooperative, Daily Bread, Cooperative of the Year last year before last. You've got absolutely an astounding number of exceptionally successful cooperatives.
Is that Northampton?
Northamptonshire, whole of Northamptonshire has not got a cooperative development agency. It did, and local government allowed it to fail, and the community allowed it to fail, and it's something that's desperately needed. I mean, even when you talk in the Black community, I just think in Black communities, because we've got relations back in countries where, as Nick said, cooperation and cooperatives are highly successful, and people know that actually, these are the people that can deliver milk and butter and bread and all the other things that you need on a whole scale national basis. It has an amazing reputation, and people know that this is great. Whereas, kind of last few weeks I've been serving behind the till, and part of it is that the capitalism stolen our clothes.
Greenwashing and stuff.
Absolutely. Iceland, what was it, year before last, with their campaign against palm oil. When you think about, actually all of the stores now have membership cards, and the co-op card, the members card, is seen as a store card rather than a members card. And yet I still serve people who can still remember their grandmother's divvy number, but won't be a member now, because they don't equate it to be the same thing. They were sent down the shop as a kind of 5 or 6 year old to get, some tea or bread or whatever.
The number on the back of your hand.
Yeah. Well, all these guys and women, they still remember that. I don't know, maybe it's the whole dementia thing, that you've got that long-term memory and you don't get the short-term memory, but they still all remember that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's interesting, Andrea, because back in the day, there was a huge resurgence of credit union activity from Jamaicans, because in Jamaica, credit unions were really, really the done deal. You know, everybody was a member of a credit union. And so we had a wave, a period of a wave of a lot of black-run, black-developed credit unions. And similarly in housing associations, Pakistan's got a massive cooperative housing sector. And yet, how many people in Britain of a Pakistani origin live in housing co-ops? Hardly any. So there's a disconnect here, isn't there? We're not joining the dots somehow.
Well, it's all opportunity, isn't it? It's all opportunity where we all should be seizing the nettle. So I'm just going to open it up for closing remarks for anybody at all. Yes, I knew you'd be there, Kevin.
I've been here for the last 15 minutes from the end up, but keep taking it down because the content is fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm particularly interested in some of Nick's earlier comments regarding modern freed slaves. And I won't take it up here, but it's something I will be in contact with you on, because if there's any people who are recently freed slaves in this area, I would very much like to do what we can to support. We have a facility where we support non-native British residents in the Victoria Centre in Wellingborough, and we're looking to expand this operation and maybe set some very interesting standards on how this can be done in terms of getting things like national insurance numbers, residency documents, business registration, tax affairs, bank accounts, jobs and benefits applications, and all of those things can be done in one place. But I would imagine freed slaves would be particularly open to getting all that. And I'm going to say to Angela that I'd like to collaborate on getting a cooperative corner set up so that we can extol the virtues and make sure people are aware of that, because once again, people who are setting up new will, I'm sure, benefit from the model. And also credit unions, something that I've already identified as something I want to evangelize within the centre. And the comments, Nick, that you made regarding the Pakistani cooperative housing situation, I want to find out more. I won't ask more here, but that's something I'll be following up with you later.
I'll definitely put you in touch with the Bright Futures people. It sounds like there's clearly a link there that's worth exploring.
And Kevin, also, I recommend you getting in touch with Messages of Hope for modern day slavery training, which they offer free, which I can make sure happens within the Victoria Centre, if that's helpful.
We'll be talking.
So on that, I'm going to kind of thank everyone for their contribution, and thank you so much for coming along and supporting this event. But in particular, thank you, Nick, for being an absolute star on this, and with your contribution and, you know, kind of really giving us an outstanding evening. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's lovely to meet you all, and keep safe, because we need every last one of you. You know, it's dark out there. We need all the support and help we can get, and you know, many hands make light work. So keep at it.
Thank you. So thank you and goodbye.
And thanks to Anne and Kate as well. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Good to meet you all.